The first thing Dex Varen noticed about the woman floating in the escape pod wasn't her beauty, though. The way starlight caught the copper threads in her dark hair made his breath catch. It was the blood on her hands. Another day, another rescue. He muttered, maneuvering his cargo hauler Wandering Star closer to the drifting pod. 3 years of running supplies between the Outer Rim colonies had taught him that space was full of stories, most of them tragic. But something about this one felt different. The pod's beacon was weak, barely a whisper against the cosmic background noise. If he hadn't been running a deep scan to avoid the Zorathian patrol route, he would have missed it entirely. The irony wasn't lost on him. Hiding from the aliens who'd killed his mother had led him to save someone else's life. Dex to Nebula Station. He spoke into his comm. "I've got a pickup, emergency pod, 1 occupant, requesting medical standby." "Copy that, Wandering Star. Bay 7 is clear. What's the condition?" He peered through the pod's small viewport. The woman inside was unconscious, her head lolled to one side, but her chest rose and fell steadily. She wore civilian clothes, a simple gray jumpsuit that had seen better days. No uniform, no rank insignia. A refugee, most likely. Alive but unconscious, ETA 15 minutes. As he guided the pod into his cargo bay using the ship's mechanical arms, Dex found himself studying her face. Even in the harsh light of the bay, she looked younger than him, maybe 25, with high cheekbones and skin that suggested she'd never worked under a harsh sun. Station-born, perhaps, or from one of the inner worlds. The pod's hatch hissed open with a pneumatic sigh. The woman's eyes fluttered open, immediately alert despite her condition. They were the color of deep space, dark blue with flecks of silver, like distant stars. "Easy," Dex said, reaching for the emergency medical kit. "You're safe, on Dex, and you're aboard my ship." She tried to sit up too quickly and winced, pressing a hand to her ribs. "How long?" Her voice was rough, unused. "Since I found you." "About an hour. Your pod was drifting near the Kepler asteroid belt." He offered her a water bulb. "What's your name?" She hesitated just long enough to make him suspicious. "Mira Stellis." "Where are you from?" "Mira Stellis." Another pause. "Does it matter?" Dex studied her face, noting the way she avoided his eyes. Everyone running from something ended up in the Outer Rim eventually. He'd learned not to push too hard for answers that people weren't ready to give. "Fair enough," he said. "Can you walk?" "We're docking at Nebula Station in 10 minutes. Medical bay's waiting." She nodded and accepted his hand to help her up. Her fingers were long and elegant, the nails cut short and practical. But when she gripped his hand, he felt calluses that spoke of hard work, and something else, small scars along her knuckles that looked like weapon burns. As they made their way to the cockpit, Dex couldn't help but notice how she moved. Despite her obvious exhaustion, there was a grace to her steps, a controlled awareness of her surroundings that reminded him of the security officers he'd known during his brief stint in the Colonial Defense Force. "You're staring," she said without looking at him. "Sorry, it's just you don't move like a civilian." She glanced at him then, and for a moment, her carefully neutral expression slipped. He saw something in her eyes: pain, regret, maybe fear. Then it was gone, replaced by a small smile that didn't quite reach those star-flecked eyes. "Everyone learns to fight out here," she said, "or they don't survive." Nebula Station grew larger in the viewport, its spinning rings and docking arms creating a complex dance of metal and light against the star field. It wasn't much to look at: a trading post and refueling stop that had grown into a small city over the decades, but it was home, or as close to home as Dex had these days. "You have somewhere to go?" he asked as they began their docking approach. Mira was quiet for so long he thought she hadn't heard him. Then she shook her head. "No, nowhere safe anyway." There was something in her voice of vulnerability that she was trying to hide. That made Dex's chest tighten. He'd felt that same lost feeling after his mother's death, when the Zorathian raiders had left New Terra in ruins, and him with nothing but a cargo ship, and a desire to stay as far from the war as possible. "Station's got decent quarters if you need a place to stay," he offered. "Cheap, too. I don't have much money. I know a guy who runs a decent cantina. Breck's always looking for extra help." Especially someone who can handle themselves. He glanced at her scars again. Something tells me you can. The docking clamps engaged with a solid thunk, and the artificial gravity of the station's ring took over. Mira swayed slightly, unused to the transition, and Dex steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. Don't mention it. We all need help sometimes." But as they walked through the station's bustling corridors, Dex couldn't shake the feeling that Mira Stellis was more than she appeared. The way she instinctively checked exits, how she flinched when someone moved too quickly in her peripheral vision, the practiced way she kept her right hand free, all of it spoke of training, of experience with danger. At the medical bay, the doctor, a gruff man named Phillips, who'd been patching up spacers for 20 years, confirmed that she was mostly unharmed. Dehydration, some bruising, a few minor cuts, but nothing serious. "You're lucky Dex found you when he did," Phillips told her as he finished his examination. "Another day or two in that pod, and we'd be having a different conversation." As they left the medical bay, Mira caught Dex's arm. "That cantina you mentioned, Brex. Would you introduce me?" "Sure thing." He smiled, surprised by how much he liked the idea of spending more time with her. "But first, let me buy you dinner. You look like you haven't eaten a real meal in days." For the first time since he'd found her, Mira's smile seemed genuine. "I'd like that." As they walked toward the commercial district, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the docking bay. The observer's eyes were the color of molten gold, and when they spoke into a small communication device, the words were in a language that hadn't been heard on human stations in years. But Dex was too busy noticing how the station's artificial lighting brought out the gold flecks in Mira's eyes, and how her laugh when he told her about the time he'd accidentally delivered a shipment of singing crystals to a monastery that had taken a vow of silence made him feel lighter than he had in months. He didn't know yet that the woman walking beside him held secrets that could change the course of the war. He didn't know that the blood on her hands when he'd found her wasn't her own. And he certainly didn't know that somewhere in the depths of space, a Zorathian fleet was already moving, following the tracking signal hidden in the very escape pod he'd rescued her from. All he knew was that for the first time since his mother's death, the future felt like it might hold something other than loss. Sometimes, in the vast darkness between stars, that was enough. Mira Stellis had been living a lie for 6 days, and it was killing her. She stood in the cramped quarters above Breck's cantina, watching through the small porthole as ships came and went from Nebula Station. Each rival made her heart race, wondering if this would be the one, if Zorathian hunters had finally tracked her down. But it wasn't fear of death that kept her awake at night. It was the memory of Dex's smile when he'd introduced her to Brick, the way his eyes lit up when she laughed at his stories, the gentle way he'd touched her shoulder when saying goodnight. She was falling in love with a man whose mother she'd helped kill. The door chimed, and Mira spun around, hand instinctively moving toward the plasma cutter she kept hidden in her belt. But it was only Jace Corin, Dex's best friend and the station's most skilled mechanic. His weathered face wore its usual expression of friendly suspicion, though today the suspicion seemed to outweigh the friendly. "Mind if I come in?" He was already stepping through the doorway, tool belt jangling softly. "We need to talk." Mira forced herself to relax, though every instinct screamed danger. Jace had been watching her since the moment Dex brought her to the station. Not obviously he was too smart for that, but she'd felt his eyes on her, cataloging her movements, her reactions, her words. "About what?" she asked, keeping her voice level. Jace closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms crossed. He was a big man, broad-shouldered from years of hauling ship parts, with graying hair and kind brown eyes that had seen too much. The kind of man who'd been a father figure to every young pilot who'd passed through these docks. "About the fact that you're Zorathian," he said quietly. The words hit her like a physical blow. Mira's carefully constructed facade cracked, and, for a moment, Jace saw past the human appearance to something else, something that spoke of distant stars and alien thoughts. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, but her voice betrayed her. "Your escape pod," Jace continued, his tone gentle but implacable. "I ran a full diagnostic when Dex brought it in. The metal composition, the energy signatures. Even the air recycling system all Zorothian tech. Disguised, but not well enough to fool someone who's been fixing ships for 30 years. Mira sank onto the narrow bed, her hands shaking. Are you going to tell him? That depends. Jace moved closer, his voice softening. Are you here to hurt him? The question broke something inside her. Mira looked up at him with tears in her eyes, tears that, despite everything else about her appearance, were distinctly human in their salt and sorrow. I've already hurt him more than you could possibly imagine, she said. And he doesn't even know it yet. Jace studied her face for a long moment, then sat down in the room's single chair. Start from the beginning. So she did, in halting words. She told him about her life as Mirash Talaris, intelligence operative for the Zorothian Third Fleet, about the raids she'd planned, the human colonies she'd helped target, the cold efficiency with which her people had waged their war of expansion. She told him about the night everything changed, about standing in the command center of the Dark Talon as they prepared to strike New Terra, watching the tactical display show thousands of human heat signatures. I was good at my job, she said, staring at her hands. To good. I could predict human defensive patterns, anticipate where civilians would flee. That's why they wanted me on the New Terra operation. Dex's homeworld, Jace said quietly. Mira nodded. I didn't know his name then. I didn't know any of their names. They were just data points. Until I watched the aftermath footage. She closed her eyes, remembering. The Zorothian fleet had expected minimal resistance. New Terra was a farming colony, lightly defended, valuable for its agricultural output. But the humans had fought back harder than anticipated. Instead of the quick, clean operation Mira had planned, it had become a massacre. There was a woman, Mira continued, her voice barely audible. She was trying to get children to a transport ship. The scanners showed 37 human juveniles under her protection. She kept going back, even as our fighters strafed the landing field. Back and forth, carrying them to safety. Elena Varen, Jace whispered. Dex's mother, she saved them all. Every single child made it to that transport. But Mira's voice broke. She didn't make it herself. A plasma burst from one of our fighters caught her just as the transport lifted off. I watched her fall, and I realized that I had planned the attack pattern that killed her. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Jace reached over and handed her a clean cloth from his toolkit, and Mira wiped her eyes. Surprised by his gentleness. That's when you decided to defect? He asked. Not immediately. It took 3 more raids before I couldn't bear it anymore. But yes, eventually I stole classified fleet movement data and ran. I've been hiding ever since, trying to find a way to get the information to human resistance cells without getting myself killed. And then Dex found you. Mira laughed bitterly. The irony is perfect, isn't it? The son of the woman I helped murder rescues me from space, feeds me, gives me a place to stay. And she looked up at Jace with desperate eyes. I'm falling in love with him, and I don't know what to do about it. Jace was quiet for a long time, processing everything she'd told him. Finally, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The data you stole, he said. How valuable is it? Extremely. Fleet positions, attack schedules, weakness assessments for a dozen human colonies. It could save thousands of lives, and you're willing to turn it over? I was trying to when they caught up with me. That's how I ended up in the escape pod my contact never showed. And Zorothian hunters found my location. I barely got away. Jace stood up and began pacing the small room. There's a resistance cell operating out of the Kepler belt. Hidden base on a hollowed-out asteroid. If you're serious about this, I am. Mira stood too, her decision crystallizing. But there's something else you need to know. The escape pod Dex found me. And it has a tracking device I couldn't disable. Primitive by Zorothian standards, but functional. They'll follow it eventually. How long do we have? Days, maybe a week if we're lucky. They'll be cautious approaching a human station, but they will come. Jace nodded grimly. Then we need to move fast. Get you and that data to the resistance. And get Dex somewhere safe. He won't leave without answers. Then we give him some. Not all of them, not yet, but enough to get him moving. Jace moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I believe you. about wanting to make amends. How can you be sure? He smiled sadly. Because I've watched you with him these past few days. The way you look at Dex, that's not the expression of someone planning betrayal. That's the look of someone who's found something worth saving. After he left, Mira stood alone in her quarters, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin. Her bioadaptive implants had changed her appearance so completely that sometimes she forgot what she really looked like. The scales along her neck and arms were invisible. Her naturally silver eyes appeared human blue, and her slightly elongated proportions had been normalized. But underneath the disguise, she was still Zorothy and still the enemy. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mira, it's Dex. Brick said you weren't feeling well. Her heart clenched at the concern in his voice. Just tired, she called back. Long day. I brought soup from the cantina. Can I come in? She almost said no. It would be easier to maintain distance, to prepare for the inevitable moment when he learned the truth. But she was weak, and his kindness was a warmth she couldn't resist. Of course. He entered carrying a steaming bowl and wearing that crooked smile that made her chest tight. Breck's famous asteroid stew. He claims it can cure anything from plasma burns to a broken heart. What about a guilty conscience? She asked before she could stop herself. Dex set the bowl down and studied her face. That depends on what you're feeling guilty about. For a moment, she almost told him everything. The words pressed against her lips like caged birds desperate for freedom. But then she saw the way he was looking at her with growing affection, with trust, with the beginnings of something that might become love, and she couldn't destroy that. Not yet. Nothing important, she lied, accepting the soup. Thank you. For this, he sat beside her on the bed, close enough that she could smell the engine oil and ozone scent that seemed to follow all pilots. Jace says we might need to leave the station soon. Some kind of security concern. So Jace had already begun laying the groundwork. Where would we go? Somewhere safer. There are places in the outer rim where people don't ask too many questions. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture so gentle it nearly broke her heart. Whatever you're running from, Mira, you don't have to face it alone. She caught his hand and held it against her cheek, memorizing the warmth of his touch. What if what I'm running from is myself? Then we'll figure it out together. The simple faith in his voice was too much. Mira pulled away and stood up, moving to the porthole to hide her tears. In the distance, she could see a ship approaching. The station sleek and dark, moving with the predatory grace of a Zorothian scout vessel. They were out of time. Dex, she said quietly, not turning around, if I asked you to true. Jace Corrin had always prided himself on being a good judge of character. 30 years of working with spacers, traders, and drifters had taught him to read people the way he read engine diagnostics, looking for the small signs that revealed the truth beneath the surface. But as he stood in the ruins of New Terra's main settlement, watching Mira Stellis kneel beside a memorial stone, he realized that sometimes the truth was more complicated than right or wrong. The journey to the Kepler Belt Resistance Base had taken 3 days aboard the Wandering Star, 3 days of watching Dex and Mira navigate the growing tension between them, him sensing her withdrawal, her struggling with secrets that seemed to be eating her alive. Jace had found himself in the impossible position of keeping Mira's confession to himself, while watching his best friend fall deeper in love with someone who might destroy him. Now they stood on the world where it had all begun, and Jace could see the truth was finally going to come out. Vera wanted us to come here first, he said, breaking the heavy silence before we head to the base. She said if Mira's intelligence is genuine, she needs to understand what's at stake. Vera Nightwind was the resistance leader. They were supposed to meet a woman whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was matched only by her hatred of anything Zorothian. Jace wasn't sure bringing Mira to her was wise, but they needed the resistance's resources to get the stolen data to the right people. Dex stood a few meters away, staring at the twisted metal that had once been his childhood home. The Zorothian bombardment had left the settlement looking like a graveyard of melted dreams. 3 years of weather had begun to reclaim the ruins, but nothing could hide the violence that had happened here. This is where you grew up? Mira asked softly, still kneeling by the memorial stone. Her voice carried a weight that made Jace look at her more closely. For 24 years. Dex replied, not taking his eyes off the ruins. My mother and I had a small farm on the outskirts. She grew the most beautiful sunflowers you've ever seen. Used to say they reminded her that even in the darkest soil, something bright could grow. Jace watched Mira's shoulders tighten, saw her hands clench into fists. He'd been wondering when the guilt would become too much to bear. Apparently, standing in the place where her actions had consequences was the breaking point. Tell me about her, Mira whispered. Dex's expression softened, lost in memory. Elena Varen was the kind of person who never met a stranger. She'd taken anyone who needed help, refugees, injured travelers, even stray animals, said the universe was too big and cold for people to be alone unless they chose to be. He walked over to a partially collapsed building, touching the scorched wall with gentle fingers. The day the Zorathians came, she was supposed to evacuate with the first transport. But when the attacks started, she saw children separated from their families, couldn't leave them behind. Jace saw Mira flinch as if she'd been struck. How many? She asked, her voice barely audible. 37 kids, Dex said, pride and pain mixing in his voice. She got every single one to safety before. He trailed off, unable to finish. Before she died. Mira completed, standing slowly. She turned to face him, and Jace could see tears streaming down her face. She died because of the attack pattern. Because someone had calculated exactly where the evacuation ships would be, where people would run, how to cause maximum chaos and fear. Something in her tone made Dex look at her sharply. How could you possibly know that? The moment stretched between them like a taut wire. Jace found himself holding his breath, knowing that everything was about to change and powerless to stop it. Because I'm the one who planned it, Mira said, her voice breaking. I'm Zorathian, Dex. My real name is Mira Ashtelaris, and I was the intelligence operative who designed the attack that killed your mother. The silence that followed was deafening. Jace watched Dex's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally, terrible understanding. The color drained from his skin, and he took a step backward as if she'd physically struck him. No, he whispered. No, that's not. You're human. I'm sorry, Mira said. And as Jace watched, her appearance began to shift. The bioadaptive camouflage that had hidden her true nature flickered and failed, revealing the subtle scales along her neck, the slightly luminescent quality to her skin, the elegant alien bone structure beneath the human facade. I'm so sorry, Dex. I never meant for this to happen. Dex staggered backward, his hand instinctively moving to the plasma pistol at his hip. You're one of them. You're one of the monsters who his voice cracked. How long have you been lying to me? Since the beginning. But my feelings for you don't. The word came out like a whip crack. Don't you dare talk to me about feelings. Everything you've said, everything you've done, it's all been a lie. Jace stepped forward, knowing he had to intervene before this escalated beyond repair. Dex, listen to me. She's not the same person who planned that attack. She defected. She's trying to make amends. Stay out of this, Jace. Dex's eyes never left Mira, and there was a coldness in them that Jace had never seen before. How long have you known? A few days. She told me, and you didn't think I had a right to know that I was falling in love with my mother's killer? The pain in his voice was like a physical blow. Mira took a step toward him, hands outstretched. Dex, please, let me explain. Explain what? His laugh was bitter, broken. How you manipulated me. How you used my grief to get close to me. How you probably enjoyed watching me trust you, care about you while knowing what you'd done. It wasn't like that. Mira's voice rose, desperate. I didn't know who you were when you found me. I didn't know about your mother until when? When did you realize you were seducing the son of one of your victims? I found out 3 days ago. Jace told me, and 3 days, Dex's voice was deadly quiet. You've known for 3 days, and you said nothing. You let me kiss you, tell you I was falling in love with you, all while knowing you killed my mother. Jace could see this was spiraling out of control. She saved your life by not telling you, he said firmly. Her people are hunting her. If you'd reacted badly, if you'd turned her in, maybe I should have. Dex spun to face him. Maybe I should turn her in right now. You don't mean that, Jace said quietly, don't I? But even as Dex said it, Jace could see the conflict. In his eyes, anger and hurt warred with something deeper. Something that 3 days of growing love couldn't simply erase. A new voice cut through the tension. Well, this is interesting. They turned to see a woman approaching through the ruined stall. Lean, with steel-gray hair and scars that spoke of a lifetime of fighting. Vera Nightwind moved like a predator, her hand resting casually on the grip of a military-grade plasma rifle. Vera, Jace said, trying to keep his voice steady, you're early. Lucky for all of you. Her cold blue eyes fixed on Mira. So this is our defector. I have to say, the resemblance to human form is remarkable. If I hadn't heard the conversation, I might have been fooled. Mira straightened, and despite everything, Jace saw a dignity in her posture that reminded him she'd once been a soldier. I have information that could save human lives. That's all that matters. Is it? Vera circled them slowly, like a shark, sensing blood. Because what I see is a Zorathian spy who's compromised one of our best pilots and may have led hunters right to our location. She's not a spy anymore, Jace said. She's trying to help. People don't change, Jace. Not really. Vera's smile was cold. They just get better at hiding what they are. That's enough, Dex said suddenly. His voice was still rough with pain, but there was steel underneath. Whatever she is, whatever she's done, she's under my protection until we reach your base. Vera raised an eyebrow. Even knowing what you know now? Dex looked at Mira, and Jace saw the war being fought behind his eyes, especially knowing what I know now. If she's telling the truth about having intelligence that can save lives, then my personal feelings don't matter. How noble, Vera said, dryly. And if she's lying, then I'll deal with her myself. The threat hung in the air between them. Mira met Dex's eyes steadily, and Jace saw her nod slightly, accepting both his protection and his promise. Very well, Vera said, we'll continue to the base, but understand this. All of you sentiment is a luxury we can't afford. If this intelligence proves false, if she's led Zorathian forces to us, I won't hesitate to do what's necessary. As they prepared to leave the ruins, Jace found himself walking beside Mira while Dex and Vera took point. Her alien features were still visible, making her look fragile and fierce at the same time. He'll never forgive me, she said quietly. Maybe not, Jace replied honestly. But that doesn't mean you stop trying to do the right thing. Why are you helping me? You know what I am, what I've done. Jace was quiet for a moment, thinking about the woman he'd seen over the past few days, the way she'd flinched at loud noises, how she'd insisted on helping in the cantina even when exhausted, the genuine tears she'd shed for people she'd never met. Because I've seen soldiers break, he said finally. Seen good people do terrible things because they were ordered to, because they were afraid, because they thought they had no choice. And I've seen what it looks like when someone realizes they were wrong and tries to make amends.